Go outside tonight after the sun is completely gone and look toward the eastern horizon. You will find one point of light that is not white. It does not flicker the way the stars flicker. It burns steady and it burns orange, like a coal somebody buried in ash and forgot to put out. You do not need a telescope. You do not need a screen. Every human being who has ever drawn breath on this planet has been able to stand in the dark and see that light with nothing but their own eyes, and almost every one of them was frightened by it. The Babylonians called it Nergal, and Nergal was not a gentle god. He ruled plague, war, and the country of the dead. The Egyptians called it Har-Decher, the Red One. In India, it was Angaraka, the burning coal. In China, it was Huaxing, the fire star, and its appearance was read as a warning that something was about to be taken away. These were cultures separated by deserts, oceans, and thousands of years. They shared almost no vocabulary. They arrived at the same associations anyway: blood, fire, punishment, an ending. Modern science has an answer for the color, and the answer is chemistry. The Martian surface is saturated with iron. That iron reacted with oxygen a very long time ago. The entire planet is coated in rust, and rust is red. That explanation is accurate, measured, and not in dispute. But there is a text, copied by hand for more than 2,000 years, that does not treat that light as a planet at all. It does not describe a rock. It does not describe a sphere of minerals on an ellipse. It describes a place. It gives that place a surface, a sky, a population, a catastrophe, and an aftermath. And in the verses that survive most completely in the mountains of Ethiopia, it describes something that left that place before the end arrived. That text is the Book of Enoch. It was stripped out of the Western canon. It vanished from Europe for roughly 1,000 years. And what it says about a burning world that was sentenced and abandoned is not a metaphor, not a parable, and not a modern reader forcing his own century backward onto old poetry. It is a description. It is written like a description, and when you set it beside what orbiters and landers have confirmed about Mars in the last 5 decades, the overlap is not vague. It is item by item. Let me show you what the text actually says. The material we are dealing with sits inside the section scholars call the Journeys of Enoch, the long stretch where Enoch is taken out of the world and shown things that are not on the world. In the 18th chapter, he is brought to a place beyond the edge of everything he recognizes, and he sees 7 objects. The text is very careful here. It does not call them stars, even though it compares them to stars. It says they resembled great burning mountains. And then Enoch asks his guide what they are, and the answer is one of the strangest sentences in ancient literature. They are the ones that transgressed. They are bound. They are held in that place, sealed, for 10,000 years, until the term of their offense is completed. Read that again slowly. In the middle of a religious text from the 3rd century before Christ, someone has written down the idea that a wandering light in the sky is not a light. It is a world. It is a world that broke a law, and it is serving a sentence. The Ge'ez manuscripts preserved in the highlands of Ethiopia carry this passage with a heading that does not appear in most English editions. It marks the section as concerning the ones that burn and are not consumed. The Aramaic material recovered from the caves at Qumran overlaps with parts of the same journey narrative, and it is older by centuries than any Ethiopian copy in existence. Which brings us to the part of this story that nobody advertises. There is a gap in the Book of Enoch, not a rumor of a gap, a documented, published, uncontested gap. Between 1947 and 1956, Bedouin shepherds and then archaeologists pulled thousands of manuscript fragments out of the caves above the Dead Sea. Among them were Aramaic pieces of Enoch, and they were cataloged in the sequence beginning at 4Q201. The Polish philologist Józef Milik spent roughly 20 years reconstructing them and published his work in 1976. What Milik found is the detail that should have ended the conversation and instead quietly started it. The astronomical portion of Enoch preserved at Qumran in Aramaic is enormously longer than the version that survived into the Ethiopian Bible. The Ge'ez text that Western readers have been handed for 2 centuries is not the full document. It is a compression. It is a summary of something much larger, and the material that got compressed was the material about the structure of the heavens, the paths of the luminaries, and the places Enoch was shown that were not Earth. That is not a fringe claim. That is the standard scholarly position, printed in the commentaries, taught in seminaries, and almost never mentioned out loud outside of them. Somebody at some point decided that the cosmology was the part you could cut, and the scholars who work closest to this material have a very particular way of writing about it. They describe the cosmological chapters as difficult. They describe their origin as uncertain. They note that the sections concerning other places and other worlds sit awkwardly inside the theology around them, as if they were carried in from somewhere else and never fully absorbed. That kind of language is not an explanation. It is a boundary marker. It is the academic equivalent of tape across a doorway. It tells you the room exists. It tells you not to go in. Now here is where this stops being a curiosity and starts being a problem. The Enoch material about the burning world does not read like Scripture. That is the first thing that hits you. Scripture has rhythm. Scripture repeats itself for emphasis, stacks images, circles back. This does not. It reads flat. It reads sequential. It reads the way a man writes when he is trying to get something down before he forgets it, and it shows no awareness that what it is recording should be impossible. Start with the ground. The text says the surface of that world is covered in a fine dust the color of dried blood, and that the dust is everywhere, on every part of it, so that the world has no other color. It says nothing falls from its sky, no rain, ever. It says the air lying over it is thin, and it uses a comparison that has no business in a document this old. It compares breathing there to breathing at the top of a mountain, where a man's chest works and gets nothing. Then it says the water is not gone. It says the water went down into the stone, and it is still there, held, unmoving, where nothing living can reach it. 4 claims. Take them one at a time. The Martian surface is iron oxide dust, and global dust storms periodically wrap the entire planet so completely that the surface disappears from view. It does not rain on Mars. It has never rained on Mars in any period we can currently observe, because the atmospheric pressure is roughly 0.6% of what you are standing in right now, which means liquid water on the open surface does not fall, it boils and freezes at the same time. That thin air comparison is not loose. At the Martian datum, the pressure is comparable to what you would find above 100,000 feet on Earth, far higher than any mountain, far past the point where a human chest is doing useful work. And the water. In 2018, a radar instrument aboard the European Space Agency's Mars Express spacecraft returned a bright reflection from beneath the southern polar ice cap. The signature was consistent with liquid water, roughly a mile below the surface sealed under ice. Later observations found more of them. Not lakes on the ground, water pushed under the rock, still liquid, unreachable. Exactly where a text written more than 2,000 years before radar existed says the water went. The Book of Enoch predicted things before modern science did. If you subscribe, you make sure to never miss out on ancient predictions which could change your life. Now look up, because the text does. Enoch describes the sky above that world, and he says there are 2 lights in it that are not stars. He is specific about why they are not stars. Stars, in his framework, hold their courses. These do not behave that way. He says they run. He uses the verb reserved elsewhere in the text for a living thing crossing ground, not for a light drifting across a sky. He says one of them is slow and the other is fast, and then he adds a line that has been sitting in that manuscript for 22 centuries doing nothing. He says the fast one is falling. Mars has 2 moons. Deimos, the outer one, takes just over 30 hours to circle the planet, so slow relative to the Martian day that it hangs in the sky for 2.5 days at a time before setting. Phobos is the other one, and Phobos is a genuine freak of the solar system. It completes an orbit in 7 hours and 39 minutes. It orbits faster than Mars rotates. That single fact produces something that happens nowhere else near us. From the Martian surface, Phobos rises in the west and sets in the east, backward against every other object in the sky, and it does it twice in a single Martian day. You would not need instruments to notice. You could sit on a rock and watch it move. and it is falling. Phobos is spiraling inward by roughly 2 centimeters a year. Tidal forces are pulling it down, and they are also pulling it apart. The grooves across its surface are believed to be stress fractures, the first stage of a body coming to pieces. In 30 to 50 million years, Phobos will either be shredded into a ring or come down onto the planet. One moon slow, one moon fast, running backward across the sky. And the fast one is descending. That is not a lucky guess. That is not the sort of detail a man invents to decorate a vision. Nobody in the ancient world had a reason to give a wandering light 2 moons at all, let alone give them different speeds, let alone note that one of them was on its way down. The text keeps going, and it goes to the ground again. It describes a mountain on that world, and the way it describes it is almost embarrassed. It says the mountain is so high that it stands above the world's own air. It says the top of it is outside the sky. And it says the mountain is not sharp like the mountains of earth. It is wide. It is a swelling. It says a man standing on it would not know he was on it, because the sides climb so gradually that the eye reads them as flat ground. Olympus Mons is about 16 miles tall, roughly 3 times the height of Everest measured from sea level. Its base would cover the state of Arizona, and because it is so tall, its summit sits above the great majority of the Martian atmosphere in what is effectively near vacuum. Its slopes average only about 5 degrees. That is the part almost nobody knows. If you were standing on Olympus Mons, you would not perceive a mountain. The horizon would be too close and the grade too gentle. You would perceive a plain, a shield volcano so broad it does not read as a mountain, with a peak that pokes out of the top of its own atmosphere. That is a highly unusual thing to describe accurately by accident. Then the text divides the world in half. It says the northern part of that world lies low and smooth, and that it was once covered. It says the southern part is high and broken, and marked all over as though something struck it many times. It says the line between them can be seen from a distance, and that the low half is the older wound. Mars is famously split. It is called the Martian dichotomy, and planetary scientists have been arguing about its cause for 50 years. The northern hemisphere is low, flat, and comparatively smooth. The southern hemisphere is elevated by 1 to 3 miles and is saturated with impact craters. The boundary between them is one of the clearest global features on the planet, and the leading explanation for the smooth northern lowlands is that they were resurfaced, possibly by a body of standing water. There are features along that boundary that some researchers read as ancient shoreline terraces, a drowned north, a cratered south, a visible seam between them. None of this requires you to rewrite what you believe. Reading Enoch alongside the Bible you already have doesn't put you at odds with your church. It just fills in context your pastor was probably never handed either. That's the spirit behind the missing lessons of the Bible. Over 200 pages cover Enoch, the Watchers, and the surrounding texts. What's genuinely ancient, what's a later invention wearing an old name, and where the real manuscript evidence actually points. It's history that deepens the Bible you already read, not a replacement for it. $19 delivered straight to your device with a full money-back guarantee and a launch price active right now. There's a code on your screen you can scan, a link right there you can tap, or you'll find it waiting in the description, whatever's easiest for you. Now the passage stops describing the world and starts describing what was on it. This is the section that Western translations handle worst, because it is the section that makes the least sense inside a Christian framework. The Ge'ez preserves more of it than the Aramaic fragments do. The text does not give these beings a personal name. It gives them a category. It calls them the ones who were before the ground here was made ready. It describes them as tall, and it uses the same word it uses for the Nephilim, the giant offspring produced when the Watchers came down and took wives among human beings. It describes their coloring as taken from their ground, reddish, the shade of the dust they walked in. And it describes their eyes as wide and pale, made for a light that is weak. Mars receives roughly 43% of the sunlight Earth does. Noon on Mars is dimmer than a heavily overcast afternoon here. Any organism that evolved there would be built for low light. And low light vision means large apertures and pale, thin irises. The text describes An adaptation. It does not appear to understand that it is describing an adaptation. It has no theory of evolution, no concept of solar flux, no framework in which a body is shaped by the brightness of its star. It just writes down what it says it saw, the way a man writes down the color of a stranger's coat. And it says they built. It says they raised their dwellings out of cut stone in the low country, and that they cut the stone to angles that do not occur in the ground on its own. It says the arrangement of what they built was not decoration. It says the arrangement was a record, which brings us to the destruction and to the strangest correspondence in the entire passage. The text does not describe a flood. It does not describe fire falling. Enoch has vocabulary for both of those, and he uses it elsewhere, and he does not use it here. He describes a removal. He says the covering of that world was taken off it. He says the shelter that stood between the world and the sky was withdrawn, and after that the air grew thin, and after that the water fled into the rock, and after that the ground lay open to a heat and a cold and a burning that nothing alive could stand under. The sequence matters. It is not simultaneous. It is one thing after another. Over a length of time, the text refuses to specify except to say it was long. Here is what actually happened to Mars. Mars once had a global magnetic field, generated by a churning molten core, exactly like the one wrapped around you right now. Roughly 4 billion years ago, that dynamo shut down. We know it existed because in 1997, the Mars Global Surveyor detected strong remnant magnetism locked into the oldest crust in the southern highlands, magnetic stripes frozen into ancient rock, the fossil signature of a field that is no longer running. When the field died, the shield went with it. The solar wind, a continuous stream of charged particles coming off the sun at hundreds of miles per second, no longer had anything deflecting it. It began stripping the Martian atmosphere directly off the top, molecule by molecule, and it has never stopped. The thick air thinned. As the pressure dropped, surface water could no longer stay liquid, so it escaped upward or sank down and froze into the crust, and the surface, with nothing above it, was left exposed to ultraviolet and cosmic radiation at levels that sterilize. Covering removed, air thinned, water into stone, ground exposed. In that order. That is the text, and that is the science, and they are the same 4 steps. Now, the part the translators did not carry across. The passage does not say that all of them died. That is the sentence that goes missing. In the fuller Giez recension, there is a section, short, easy to skip, that describes a departure. It says a portion of them went out before the sentence fell. It says they knew it was coming. And the verb it uses for their leaving is not a verb about death or ascent. It is the descent verb. It is the exact word the Book of Enoch uses in its most famous passage, the one everybody knows, where 200 watchers come down onto the mountain and swear an oath to each other and take human wives and teach mankind metallurgy, weapons, cosmetics, root cutting, and the reading of the stars. The same word for both events. The text treats the departure from the burning world and the arrival of the watchers on earth as the same category of event, performed by the same category of being. And it never says so directly. It does not have to. It just uses the vocabulary over and over and lets the vocabulary say it. There is one more detail in that section, and it is the one that will stay with you. The text says they did not arrive here intact. It says the crossing altered them. It says that what reached this world was not what left the other one, and that when human beings encountered them, they could not decide what they were looking at. Not fully solid, not fully spirit, present in a room and yet wrong in the room. The word the GEs uses for that condition is the same word applied to the Watchers when Enoch first stands in front of them and describes beings that appear to be made of fire and shape at the same time. So the implication assembles itself without anyone stating it. The Watchers were not from here. The Watchers came from somewhere, and the somewhere has a color, a location, a fixed path through the sky, and it comes up in the east every single night of your life. And here is the thing that keeps this from being purely a question about a manuscript. Pieces of Mars are already on Earth, not theoretically, physically. There are hundreds of confirmed Martian meteorites in collections around the world, rocks blasted off that surface by impacts, thrown into solar orbit, and eventually swept up by our gravity. The best known was picked up in the Allen Hills of Antarctica in 1984 and cataloged as ALH 84001. In 1996, a NASA research team announced that it contained structures they interpreted as possible microfossils, along with organic compounds and magnetite crystals, of the kind produced by bacteria. The claim was disputed immediately. It is still disputed and nobody has yet managed to kill it. That rock left Mars roughly 17 million years ago and landed here about 13,000 years ago. Material from that world crossing the gap and arriving on this one is not a belief. It is a documented, ongoing physical process. The only open question has ever been what the material was carrying. Then there is the surface itself. In July 1976, Viking 1 photographed a region in the northern lowlands called Cydonia, and one frame contained a mesa roughly 1.5 miles long that, in that specific lighting, looked unmistakably like a face staring up. NASA released it and described it as a trick of shadow. But researchers combing the same region identified a cluster of nearby formations with angular geometry, including a 5-sided structure that became known as the D and M pyramid. Richard Hoagland, a former broadcast science consultant, spent years arguing that the angular relationships between those formations were too regular to be erosion. In 1998 and again in 2001, the Mars Global Surveyor rephotographed Cydonia at far higher resolution. The face flattened out into an eroded mesa. Most of the drama evaporated. Most of it, not all of it. The 5-sided formation is still there, still 5-sided, and the geometry of the cluster has never actually been studied by anyone with a budget. The images were published. The follow-up was never funded. Everyone agreed it was nothing, and then everyone stopped looking, which are two different things. The Book of Enoch predicted things before modern science did. If you subscribe, you make sure to never miss out on ancient predictions which could change your life. And Mars has not gone quiet. The MAVEN spacecraft has been measuring atmospheric loss since 2014, and in 2015, its principal investigator published the rate. Mars is still bleeding out right now, at an average of roughly 100 grams of atmosphere per second, and the rate spikes hard during solar storms. The stripping did not finish 4 billion years ago. It is happening while you watch. The InSight lander, before it died in 2022, recorded more than 1,000 Marsquakes, most of them clustered around a fracture system called Cerberus foci. The ground there is still moving, and orbiters and rovers have both detected methane appearing in the Martian atmosphere in pulses that rise and then vanish, which is a problem because methane in that environment should break down within a few centuries. Something is producing it now. Nobody knows what. A world that was supposedly finished 4 billion years ago is still losing its air, still cracking, and still exhaling a gas it should not have. So how does a text like this end up buried? The Book of Enoch was not obscure in the early centuries. It was read, quoted, and taken seriously. The Epistle of Jude in the New Testament quotes it directly by name as prophecy. Tertullian defended it in writing and argued that the reason it was being rejected was that people did not like what was in it. Then it disappeared from the Western Church almost completely. For roughly 1,000 years, Europe did not possess a copy. It survived in one place because the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church never stopped considering it scripture and never stopped copying it. The only reason you can read it today is that a Scottish traveler named James Bruce went to Ethiopia looking for the source of the Nile and came back in 1773 carrying 3 Ge'ez manuscripts of a book Europe had written off as lost. It took another 48 years for anyone to translate it into English. Richard Lawrence finally did it in 1821. And when R.H. Charles produced the version that became the standard reference in 1906, something happened to the cosmological chapters. They were tightened. Passages were treated as corrupt and condensed. Lines that made no sense to a Victorian Oxford scholar were smoothed into lines that did. That is not a conspiracy. That is just what translators do when they hit material they consider nonsense. A man reading about a burning world with 2 running lights and a mountain above its own sky in 1906 had exactly one available conclusion, which was that the scribe had garbled something. So he fixed it. He fixed the only description of Mars written before the telescope. There is a coda to this, and I want to be careful because I cannot verify it, and neither can you. In academic circles, there is a persistent account of a comparative proposal submitted within the last decade that sought funding to place the Ge'ez cosmological chapters side by side with current Martian surface data. The stated reason for its rejection, according to the account, was that no scholarly precedent existed for the comparison, which is the cleanest circle in the world. There is no precedent because nobody has done it. Nobody has done it because there is no precedent. Now let me be extremely clear about what I am not saying. I am not telling you that a civilization on Mars built Cydonia and then flew here and became the Watchers. I am not telling you a man in the 3rd century before Christ stood on Martian regolith. Ancient documents are copied, mistranslated, expanded, and edited across centuries. This one has passed through more hands than almost any surviving text. Anyone who claims to know exactly what the original said is selling you something. But strip away every interpretation and look only at the checklist. A world of red dust with no other color. No rainfall, ever. Air too thin to breathe, compared to the top of a mountain. Water withdrawn into stone and still there. 2 lights that run instead of drift, one slow, one fast, the fast one falling. A mountain so wide it reads as flat with its peak above its own sky. A low drowned northern half and a cratered southern half with a visible seam. A protective covering removed, followed by thinning air, followed by fleeing water, followed by an exposed and burning surface in that exact sequence. Every single one of those is independently confirmed. Everyone required a spacecraft to establish. Any one of them alone is a coincidence you could shrug off in a second. All of them in one passage in the same order is not. The manuscript is still in Ethiopia, in the same script it has always been in, saying the same thing it has always said. The compressed Ge'ez and the fuller Aramaic still do not match, and the missing material is still the cosmology. Cydonia is still photographed and still unexamined by anyone with authority to settle it. Mars is still losing 100 grams of its air every second to a sun it has no shield against. Phobos is still running backward across that sky and still coming down. And tonight, when it gets dark, that orange point of light will come up in the east exactly where it has come up for every generation of human beings who ever lived, steady, unblinking, and silent. The oldest book we were not allowed to keep says it is not a star. It says it is a sentence being served.